I'm Sandra Astars, a professor at SCALIA Law and senior scholar and director of copyright research and policy at the Center for the Protection of Intellectual Property. I'm honored to host this keynote conversation with Rosanne Cash. Rosanne is a Grammy-winning composer, performer, songwriter, best-selling author, and essayist. She has composed Americana, rock, blues, folk, and pop music, released 15 albums, earned 4 Grammy Awards, and been nominated for 12 more. Among the many honors she has been awarded in her career are the SAG-AFTRA Lifetime Achievement Award for Sound Recordings, the Smithsonian Ingenuity Award in Performing Arts, and an honorary doctorate of music from the Berklee College of Music. She's partnered in programming with or served as artist in residence at Carnegie Hall, Lincoln Center, San Francisco Jazz, the Minnesota Orchestra, the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum, and the Library of Congress. We are truly honored that she has shared her thoughts with us today. I'll be chatting with Rosanne for about 30 minutes, and then we'll turn to questions from the audience. If you would like to ask a question of Rosanne, please send it now or while we're speaking via the chat function on Zoom. My colleagues will be helping me monitor the chat box and during our discussion, and they'll be helping me identify questions that we can ask Rosanne at the end. And just so you know, only the CPIP team will be seeing your question. So Rosanne, thank you again for joining us. Let's start with this. The title of our conference is The Evolving Music Ecosystem. And the dictionary definition of an ecosystem is a community of living organisms and all of their interrelationships. Can you tell us about your personal music ecosystem?
Well, first, thank you for inviting me. I'm honored. And I have to say, I feel very protected by this organization and you people who have artists' backs. So thank you for that. I was thinking about that. I knew that was the title of the conference, obviously, and that you would ask this question. So I started writing a list of who was in my musical business ecosystem, and it was shocking. It went on. And it made me think. I did a photo session many years ago with Annie Leibovitz, and she brings an enormous crew, like a film crew. And I said to her, this makes me feel awkward that we're doing all of this for this one photo session. And she goes, no, we provide work for each other. And I've never forgotten that. So I don't ever look at it as being all about me. It's about providing work for each other in this ecosystem, as you call it. So the first person in the nucleus of my ecosystem is John Leventhal, who's my husband and most of the time producer and a lot of times co-writer. He's also a recording engineer, so we have kind of a in-house, cottage industry here. We've got a recording studio on the ground floor. So I would say John and I perform are the nucleus of this. And then there are the other musicians I work with, both in the studio and on the road. And that's really a family relationship. It's central. It's the relationships between musicians are, it's the same language, very specific language. You trade inspiration and ideas. So that's critical. And then the audience, the fans are an enormous part of that. And I feel like I'm lucky to have had a core audience for my entire 40 years. And then there are some who come in and out for each record, like a particular record, Some people I call the interiors group because they're just obsessed with that one record and then they don't care about the rest of them, which is fine. But that's a living organism, the relationship between a performer and the audience. It's a chemical reaction and it's moving energy and sparking feeling and reflection and release, you know, that's been critical to me. It's been one of the things in the pandemic I've missed most. And then, you know, my manager of 25 years, Danny Kahn, who we bounce everything off of. Should I do this? Should I do this? A lot of times I don't listen to him, and he's very patient about that. And then there's the crew. When you're on the road, there's the sound person and the monitor person. There are the drivers. There are the hotel maids, who are my personal heroes, because they're always seem to be cheerful and, you know, in a really hard job. They're the lawyers. My lawyer, Elliot Groffman, who I've also been with for 25 years. There's my PRO, CSAC. My song administrator, Damon Booth. There's my record label, Blue Note. There are the venues, the concert promoters, the staff at the venues. I mean, it's really, you could go on and on, you know, there are the flight attendants that when you're on the road. It's really a big web that goes out from that central creative nucleus. And I do feel incredibly supported. And, you know, I appreciate, some artists don't appreciate, but I appreciate the music critics too, the journalists, those writers who are not artists themselves, but who so understand and appreciate. Not all of them, but those who do, who give you sometimes very, very valuable feedback that you don't expect. I don't read concert reviews that often, but I do read record reviews. Is that a big enough ecosystem?
You know, it's consistent what I hear with other artists, not just in the music industry, but across industries. I mean, a lot of people, you know, fans, you know, think about the artist, but then don't think about the ecosystem around the artist, the community of other people the artist supports with the work that the artist puts out there into the world. And, you know, how every dollar the artist, you know, earns is a, you know, maybe $10 that the community earns, you know, from that artist's work. And, you know, that's an important part of what the artist puts out into the world, you know, along with what the artist is putting out creatively as well. And one of the reasons why we chose this theme for the conference, and Sean said this as we were opening the event yesterday, and I think he's emphasized this throughout the day yesterday and today as well, is that we're seeking to explore the various elements that we need to build a thriving creative sector. You know, a lot of communities seek to encourage the growth of, like, maybe a tech sector in their community, in their area. And, you know, we think it's important to also explore, you know, what's necessary to build thriving creative sectors in a community because of just what you're saying and showing us through your experience, because a creative worker also puts out a lot into the community. So what have you seen in your experience that's necessary to build a creative, thriving creative sector in a given community, say where you work?
Well, support for the arts is key. You know, it just is crushing when the first thing they cut from public schools are music and art classes, you know. So we were talking about this yesterday, about that percentage of children in a classroom who are naturally artists and who don't have any outlets or very little outlet or feedback or understanding even. You know, the mathematicians and the scientists and the English majors, it's understandable and there's a support system. But for artists, there's often not, and musicians, often not a support system until they can choose to do it. And by that time, you know, when they're late high school or college, they haven't had the infrastructure to even know how to find it for themselves, or and that's heartbreaking, really. And I mean, I think the support you're talking about, besides the support for not only music classes but for venues, it has to go down to independent musicians too. I mean, the independent musicians during the pandemic, they're really suffering, and some of them will have to leave their chosen mission in this world. You know, they can't do it anymore and survive. I support Music Health Alliance, for one organization that helps independent musicians, and they're getting requests for grants for $500, you know, just so they can pay rent, buy groceries. And I don't know how they will survive to make music. And I feel myself to be a link in the chain of that. You know, the earlier generations who deserve the respect of being paid, particularly those older performers who can't go on the road anymore or never did go on the road, were non-performing songwriters. How do we support them? And then the next generation after me, the young musicians who are selling CDs out of a car, if they still buy CDs, they're probably selling cassettes at this point, or vinyl. But how do you support them? You know, did you read this thing in the paper about how France just gave something like $2 billion to support culture, and something like 500 million to performing arts? It's like, why can't we do that? Why do we not value the arts enough? The federal government would support us, because we're a service industry. Musicians are in a service industry. We service the heart and soul.
Well, let's turn to your artistic process then. We're, of course, all fascinated to know how a Grammy-winning composer and performer works. But you're also a best-selling author, an essayist. So it's interesting to me to hear about your artistic process as a whole. And can you talk about how writing prose on the one hand and composing music and lyrics on the other compare?
Yeah, I mean, my process, I'm in my kitchen, and my guitar is not a prop. It stays on that little sofa, and I have my computer with GarageBand, and I've got a mic set up in here too that I can plug into my computer. So I write in here and, you know, make demos in here. John is down in the studio most of the times, and I go down there when we record, but I don't really go down there to mess around, because the platforms, it was a steep learning curve once we went from analog to digital, and I can't do Cubase. I don't have the wiring for it. Anyway, that's one thing. I like working in the kitchen too. I need a lot of breaks to work. You know, even after an hour, I get up and do something else. I leave the house, and then it all starts filtering and starts to make sense, and then I come back. I think that's true for everyone. I'm sure it's true for you when you're writing a brief or something, that a problem solves itself when you're taking a walk or in the shower. Hold on, sorry. Are you still there? Good. The difference between writing songs and prose. Songs are a very prescribed playground. Once I build the structure of my house in a song, you know, whether it's going to be verse, chorus, bridge, whatever it is, whatever my rhyme scheme is, then I fit into that. There's this infrastructure, or one verse, and then the infrastructure reveals itself. And language, just my attention to language is central to that. And I've kind of always been like that, listening, hearing phrases on the street, or words, reading a word and looking it up, you know, to get the subtleties of the definition. I mean, this is getting into the weeds, but between the difference between songwriting and prose is that there's not that infrastructure in prose. Although it starts to reveal itself later on, I can see where it's heading, just like a song. I mean, in that way, they're identical. It's like you don't know where you're going, and then it reveals itself, and then you just have to do the work to get to the end of it. And there's the danger in writing prose. It seems there's more danger. You know, you can get lost and have to pull yourself back out. But Sandra, really one of the key things is editing. Edit, edit, edit. Revive. You just, I think it was Natalie Goldberg who wrote a great book about writing, and she said you turn a line over in your hands like a stone until it becomes smooth. You know, and one of my songwriting mentors, Guy Clark, said once, he said, if you have to throw out the best line of your song to make the song work, then you've got to be relentless, and you've got to be ruthless with what your song's about. You can't hang a song on one line, or I can't. And with writing prose, there generally is an editor, you know, like I like commissioned pieces. I wrote recently for The Atlantic, and I've written for Billboard and the New York Times. If they say, give me 1,200 words, I like that. And that way I'm kind of, well, I'm very structured in that way. In other ways, it's a mess, you know, this is all a mess in here. But that kind of structure is a relief to me. And deadlines as well. I like deadlines.
I wish you were a law student. Deadlines and writing, you know, with limits, page limits, and so forth. I mean, judges would love you. Deadlines and page limits. You should have, you know, pursued a second career as well.
Judges would not love me.
Fantastic. Well, you know, actually, I've seen you testify before Congress, so I know you know how to do what we do, so we can learn from you there.
Well, you coached me. Come on. I would have been lost at sea without my coaches for that. It was, I actually burst into tears that morning, if you don't, if you remember. I was so frightened.
I do not remember anything of the sort. I remember you being fantastic and knocking it out of the park in your testimony on the Hill that day. And for folks who don't know what we're talking about, Rosanne testified before the House Judiciary Committee during their review of the Copyright Act a few years ago, when they conducted a really thorough A to Z review of the Copyright Act. And she was among actually 100 witnesses who testified, but she was among the most powerful witnesses, you know, because she was able to testify, you know, not only as an artist, but as, you know, somebody who truly understood the business of music. And she truly had powerful testimony. So, you know, speaking of Congress, you remain very involved in artist advocacy, and you're doing that now through the Artist Rights Alliance. Can you tell us a little bit about that and why you chose to become involved in that group?
Well, first, let me say that I don't understand policy details like you do and like everyone at this conference does. It's very difficult for me to parse out. I get the big picture. I get how important transparency is. You know, I get the idea that an artist should be able to control their own work. and should be compensated fairly. And this Artist Bill of Rights that the Artist Rights Alliance came up with, I'm on the board of the Artist Rights Alliance. Again, because I consider myself part of a chain of what came before and the next generation of musicians. And a lot of times I say, you know, I'm planting a garden I will never see bloom. And that's okay. I'm fine. I'm fine. I've been doing this 40 years. I'm okay. I worry about the next generation, and I worry about our legacy artists too. So in Artist Rights Alliance, we have Ted Kalo as our executive director, and he does understand all of these, the specifics. He's fantastic, as you do. And we have educators, and then the rest of the board, we're working musicians. So we want the right to control our work. I mean, that seems baseline to me. Everyone should have the right to control their work and to have economic freedom, to not be bound in indentured servitude to a major label, you know, for the rest of your life, which I don't think happens anymore. I mean, I think people have gotten too smart for that. And we want attribution. I can't tell you how many times I've gone on a lyric site to check a lyric and they list the singer as the songwriter, which is not always the case, as you know. And they, though that kind of just, it's so discouraging that songwriters aren't valued enough for them to actually take one more step and look up who the songwriter was and list that person. And that's just one of the things about attribution. And the right and the ability to be part of a community, I have found that very easy, and I'm really privileged and lucky in that way. But some people are in a room by themselves not knowing how to connect or who to connect with. And one more thing I want to say about that, and that goes along with all our rights, is this idea of exposure that artists and musicians are a lot of times expected to do, to work for free. And the reasoning is that you'll get exposure from working for free. It makes no sense to me. I mean, how do you pay the rent with exposure? Would you ask your plumber to fix your sink and go, I'm going to tell all my friends about you, but I'm not going to pay you? I mean, that it's not survivable.
So before we turn to audience questions, I want to ask you one other thing, because I know throughout your career, both as a creator and as an activist, you've focused on two big kind of constitutional protections. One is the First Amendment, and the other is copyright protection. And, you know, to me, they go hand in hand. So, you know, as a lawyer, it's, you know, understandable why you'd focus on those. But why are these two constitutional protections important to you as an artist?
Well, sometimes, you know, I'm very involved politically, and I have a lot of social issues I care about, and I've been involved in the anti-gun violence movement for 20 years. And a lot of times people have said to me, shut up and sing. I mean, I know a lot of artists have said that. First, that's anatomically impossible, by the way. And, and Tom Morello said the greatest thing that I use this all the time. He said, I did not give up my First Amendment rights when I picked up my guitar. I did not set down the First Amendment because I'm a citizen and I care about what's happening in my country. And also some of the, I mean, setting aside protest songs, which are direct, like Woody Guthrie songs or Mavis Staples or civil rights era songs, you know, some Steve Earle songs, all of these people, Nina Simone, these people who are so important to make us think about our current political climate and social climate and injustice and change. all of those people and those songs are critical, and I think they're really, really critical right now. But then there are those songs and those works of art that are not understandable, or they're the reverse of what you think they are. You know, Steve Earle writing a song about the guy, I can't remember his name right now, and I'm really sorry, who joined the Taliban. And Steve Earle took the first person when he wrote that song, and everyone attacked him. It's like, do you attack Anthony Hopkins for portraying a serial killer? You know, this is what art is about. It partly to make you uncomfortable and make you think, but also to arouse your feeling. You know, Bob Dylan said, an audience doesn't come to feel my feelings, they come to feel their own. And that's service. So that one, First Amendment, Second Amendment, I think needs to be revised. Copyright goes along with First Amendment. What your creative work should belong to you and not be appropriated by tech companies.
All right, we're going to move to audience questions now. And as we do that, we first have a question, I know, from Billboard's senior legal correspondent, Claudia Rosenbaum. So Claudia, if you can raise your hand through the Zoom hand function at the bottom of your screen, Mary Claire can promote you so you can unmute and ask your question.
My hand's raised.
Okay, and we can hear you.
Okay, great. Rosanne, thank you so much for taking the time to answer my question today. Recently, we've heard a lot of songwriters and artists express unhappiness, sometimes very loudly, about the Trump campaign playing their songs or music. They might say that playing these songs are their freedom of speech, but you also have freedom of speech as an artist. What do you think about that, about the campaign sort of co-opting these songs? And
well, yeah, that's a great question. In fact, Artists' Rights Alliance put out a statement recently about that. Music just isn't just in the air that you can grab it and make it suit your own agenda. It was created by a real person, a real team. And by a campaign co-opting it without your permission, there's an implication that the artist supports that agenda. And that it's not right. I mean, that's part of our Artist Bill of Rights, is that we should be able to control our own work. Whether you agree, I mean, I think that whether, you know, if you're the biggest supporter in the world of someone, they still shouldn't co-opt your work without your permission. It seems obvious to me.
So we're going to move to questions from the chat box, and I've got some that have come in during the time that we've been speaking, Rosanne, which I will, you know, just go through, and Devlin has been helping me pick those out, but folks should continue to send them in, and we'll get to as many as we can. So the first one I have comes from Jake Linford, and he says, "Hey, Rosanne, I love your work. It seems that recent technology and legal changes have brought copyright issues to the front of mind for many artists, but when did you first start thinking and worrying about copyright law and copyright issues? Or was it always a part of your composing, creating, and business plan?"
No, not always. I mean, when I was a young artist, I signed away a lot of my work. I signed away my masters for decades. You know, I'm just now starting to get reversions 30 years later, so that I can own my own masters. So no, I didn't think it through. My dad testified in the same committee I did in Congress in 95, I believe, for the DMCA. And, you know, since that time that my dad has testified, the whole playing field is different, as you know. It was, the DMCA was written when internet speeds were really slow. It was AOL. It was assumed that an artist could issue a takedown notice and that would happen. Now it's, it's Taylor Swift is the only person who has a team of lawyers to issue takedown notices every day. But I did get more interested when it came really through my compassion. I think my compassion was the first thing aroused. It's what I've been talking about, both legacy artists and the next generation. When I realized that Percy Sledge didn't make any money for singing When a Man Loves a Woman because it was recorded pre-72 in the digital realm anyway, and that Michael Bolton did make money from that song for re-recording it out in the 90s, just thought that, Percy Sledge deserved that money too. He's an old man, he couldn't go on the road anymore. So I think it aroused my sense of righteous indignation, and that's why I got more involved. And also John McCrae from the band Cake, he met me one day and he said, it's time to grow up. It's not part of this artistic ethos that we have to be dumb about the business and our own work.
Thanks. We have a question from Michael Dean, who's a student here. And Michael asks, whoops, I just lost it. A two-part question, and darn, where'd it go? He asks, I will ask it from memory because it just disappeared. He asks about your father giving you the list when you were 18 years old. And he asks also about, how old were you when you realized how influential your father was? And the second part of his question is whether you can shed some light on the implications and the royalties implications in particular when a family member re-records a work that has been written by another family member. So for instance, Tennessee Flat Top Box, like your dad's work that you've recorded.
Let me answer the first question first. I realized that my dad was bigger than our family, for lack of a better way to put it, when I was 6 and a film crew showed up at our house. And I really resented that. I did not want to share him with the world. And that went on for a long time. And the list of songs he gave me when I was 18 years old, I think changed the course of my life because I didn't care about country or, Appalachian music that much. I grew up in Southern California. I was totally passionate about what was coming out of Southern California in the late 60s and 70s. And this list opened my eyes to the depth of the heart in that music. I mean, you would think that that's counterintuitive because my dad was in that field, but he came from Memphis, not Nashville, so it was slightly different. And also he became an iconic figure that transcended those genres. But anyway, examining that list of songs and why they were so great and learning to play them on the guitar, that changed my life and my mind. The second part about when a family member re-records a song another family member wrote, what was the question about that? Was it something about the royalties or just the feeling of it?
So the question was specific to the royalty structure, but I think people would love to hear both.
Well, the royalty structure, as I understand, is that my dad, when I re-recorded it, he obviously made money as a songwriter for the airplane sales of that song. And I made money from the sale of the record. And then, of course, when my dad died, those royalties are divided up between the children. So in this really sweet way, you know, that has come back to me. I never quite thought of it in that way. That's very moving.
Thanks. So talking about the pandemic, Janet Masters asks, how has your creative process been impacted by the pandemic?
Well, I was really burnt out from being on the road, and I wrote a piece about it for The Atlantic. It's called "I Will Miss What I Wanted to Lose." And I had been talking for 2 years about getting off the road. You know, I'm not 25 anymore. It's really grueling. I love the relationship with the audience, but you know, as Charlie Watts in the Rolling Stones said, it's the other 22 hours that start killing you. And I don't write as much when I'm on the road. And that is really, you know, where my heart is and where I started as a songwriter. So since the pandemic, I've been home. I've written quite a few songs. I've written a couple of essays, this one for The Atlantic and one for the upcoming Oxford American Music issue. I created a playlist for the Oxford American. I've done a gazillion of these charity things for musicians, organizations, for venues, for healthcare workers, and then created a show for Carnegie Hall that was online, doing something for the Metropolitan Museum. So it's not that I haven't been working, I've been working a lot. And honestly, I miss the audiences, but I'm loving being at home. And can I just frame that by saying I'm really, again, I'm so privileged. It's easier for me to be at home. I know that it's devastating for so many people.
There's another question here, which I saw, and now I'm not seeing who it's from, but the question asks, it's from Alan Tills. What can those of us in the music industry who are doing financially okay during the pandemic do for musicians, crew, etc., who aren't?
Well, I mean, the most obvious is donate to places who are really trying to take care of independent musicians, and also, I just said museums, so I did that. Also, venues, you know, there are a lot of nonprofit art centers who need help. Go to their benefits online. You know, I just did one for a theater up in Great Barrington, the Mojave Theater. I did a thing for the Paramount Theater's gala, you know, like support those venues, support organizations that help get health insurance for musicians. You know, they're independent, they don't get that from any employer. And buy music, you know, get rid of the free tier on streaming sites. At least pay for your streams.
So there's a question from Liz Homick, and she says, I'm graduating college in May with a degree in music business.
Congratulations.
What advice do you have for a woman going into the music industry at this point in time?
I wonder which area of the music business she's going into. Like, is she going into A&R? Is she going into legal?
I don't know, maybe she can chat an answer to us, but she says live events if we still have them.
Oh, great. Well, what advice do I have? I don't know. I guess see a lot of shows yourself and listen to a lot of music yourself, and don't ever lose your passion for music. I can't tell you how many people I know in the music business who don't really care about music, you know, and I think to value those relationships. I mean, this is all kind of general stuff because I'm on the other side and I know who I appreciate in this business, those who are happy to have me there and who make sure I have a tea kettle in the dressing room, and who invite me back. You know, that's really meaningful to me. It's like the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis. I played there so many times and they still invite me back, and I have this audience who keeps coming back to see me. That's really valuable. I don't know what else to say about that, but it's thrilling she's going into that, and I hope it does survive.
And support other women, right?
Absolutely. I mean, side note on that.
You've done that throughout your career, right? So
yeah, not so much with the band, and I feel kind of guilty about that. But when I started out, you know, there were very few women who were side musicians in a band, fewer who were producers or engineers, fewer who were sound engineers on the road. And I see it changing a little bit, but I think it's still just abysmal. I think it's like 3% of producers are women. Very few women in A&R. I hope some of your students go into A&R.
So we have a question from Yumi Oda, who happens to be an LLM student here. And she says, I sincerely admire how much you create and advocate for artists to the level you do. Is there anything you do consciously, especially during the current pandemic, to stay creative and inspired?
Well, like I said, not being on the road has created this space that there's been kind of an explosion of excitement about writing again and recording. And it's like when I was on the road a lot in the last 3 years, last 4 years actually, since my album The River and the Thread came out, and it won 3 Grammys, and it was like this machine. You know, you've got to take advantage of this opportunity. And I was working on the road so much that I didn't write very much. And when I started getting really burnt out in the last year, my girlfriend said to me, she said, you don't know what you want to do until you have the space to think about it. And that was so true. And now that I have the space to think about it, it's been this burst of songwriting and prose writing. So, and right now I've recorded 4 songs, and I was thinking about maybe it's an EP, maybe it's a record next year, an album. So, but as far as priming your own pump, I wonder if she's asking about that. I think you'd have to stay awake and alert. You know, don't let the world go by. Be attentive to language and little moments of relationship between people, and stay in touch with the mystery. Because a part of this, you know, I'm talking to you about this, but a part of it is very mysterious. That's what creativity is about. And as my friend Stephen Pressfield, who wrote this great book called The War of Art, he says, you have to show the muse you're serious. You know, you can't just be a dilettante and do a little bit there and then stay on your phone for a week. It's like, you got to show that you're serious.
So we have a question. Do you ever worry about how your political activities will impact your fans or other industry audiences, such as programmers, journalists, and the like?
No.
Somehow I thought that was going to be your answer.
What am I supposed to do? I mean, shut a part of myself down so I'll sell 5 more records? That doesn't make sense. And I wasn't raised that way. I was raised that you have the courage of your convictions, you speak your conscience, and not everyone's going to agree with me. I mean, that's a given. Not everyone understands who I am. Not everyone likes me. Not everyone, people who think they know me don't really. These people who say, oh, your dad would be ashamed of you. It's like, were you in the room with us when we were discussing these subjects? You know, you don't know that. I don't worry about it. A couple of times, I have to be honest, a couple of times I've worried about violence. I've been threatened, you know, and I generally let it roll off me. A couple of times it seemed more serious. And my daughter was threatened, and then I got really pissed off. And, you know, a couple of times I've had to call the FBI and they say this person's not a threat or whatever. But I've been here too long, and I feel too passionate to hide it. And I try to act with respect. I try not to be divisive, but I can't be quiet.
In a different vein, from Greg Rank, what's your favorite guitar to record and perform with? Make, model, and year.
Hold on. It's my Martin OM28, and Martin guitar. It's a signature model, so it's a Rosanne Cash OM28 that Martin made for me in 2008. And I've had it on the road since then, and I record with it, and it's gotten sweeter with age. And I got to design it too. Well, John helped me a lot because I wanted to put a lot of fancy stuff on it, a lot of mother of pearl, and like make all this stuff. He goes, don't do it. You won't like that in 5 years. So I toned it down. And I'm not that tall, so I didn't want a dreadnought because it felt like it overwhelmed me. So I got a smaller model, the OM28, and I love it. And it sounds fantastic.
So Tim Brennan, first, what an honor, thank you. As a songwriter and recording artist, have you ever finished something and then discovered that it might be too much like something else you hadn't heard before? This follows a discussion in the earlier panel on the blurred lines case.
Now, I thought the question was going to be the reverse, that he was going to say, if it sounds too much.
Yeah, I think he probably means something that you had heard before.
Oh, I still do it, but thankfully, generally I borrow from myself. You know, I get into it, I go, oh no, that's the same melody I wrote 10 years ago. Sometimes we'll recognize that we're borrowing too heavily from something that influenced us, you know, 30, 40 years ago when we were kids, that stuck in some Beatles melody or Neil Young melody or Buffalo Springfield, or but we usually catch ourselves. I've never been accused of plagiarism, but you know, as the decline starts, that could happen.
I hope not. So my colleague Christina Petro asks, what would your career have been if singing, songwriting, and writing didn't work out? I vote lawyer, but
I don't know that I could envision that. I mean, I have a lot of interests. You know, I'm fascinated by science and archaeology and quantum physics, you know, because the language of quantum physics is so great, you know, dark matter. But that's where I go. You know, when I read about science, the language is what gets me, you know, the way they have of describing these mysterious forces in the universe. So I don't think I could be a scientist. And archaeology, the thing that interests me is the time travel aspect. So I don't know that I could know how to log a piece of pottery or something. I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't have had a career. Maybe I would have been a domestic goddess.
you are a domestic goddess. Look at the beautiful kitchen from which you compose. So.
Well, I do collect china.
Going back to actually the thread that we were on a question ago, there's a question from Nick Churchill, who is a graduate, an LLM graduate of SCALIA. And he asks, in your experience, how much do artists consider the line between inspiration and copying when creating?
Related to the previous question.
Yeah, to me, it's related. It's the same kind of thread to me, but.
Okay, so I know how to answer that. So there are basically 5 stories, and Shakespeare wrote all of them, right? And there are 12 notes, and well, you know what I mean. And they're chord progressions. There's no new chord progression that I know of unless John Cage wrote it. And so nobody is entirely original, but there are people who burst through, how the traditions that they understand have processed through their bodies is thrilling and brilliant and dynamic and seems completely original. And in the way that that human being has never existed on earth before, that is original. That's completely original. But the traditions we borrow from, the notes and the stories and the rhyme schemes and who came before, it's how you metabolize it, how you process it, how it comes through your own experience. You bring your own experience to those 5 stories. You bring your own experience to those notes and those chord progressions. And then therein lies the originality. But I want to say one more part of that. I don't respect artists who don't know the traditions they're working in. And, you know, if you're a folk songwriter and you don't know Appalachian folk songs or Bob Dylan or Woody Guthrie or Jimmy Rogers, then I can't respect that, because you're not sui generis. You're building on something and you're putting it through, metabolizing it through your own experience. And the other part of that is discipline. Songs, if you get hit by a song that falls from the atmosphere, you're really lucky, but that doesn't mean it's great. Could be, but you might have to apply your discipline to refine it.
So I'm going to close the question and answer period from the audience with a question from Samantha Lavine, who is a recent Scalia Law grad. And she asks, what do you think is the biggest thing lawyers overlook or don't understand when it comes to music?
Wow. I have never thought about that. I have a really good lawyer, and he's, as far as I can tell, hasn't overlooked anything. I don't know if it's a matter of overlooking as it is as much having an understanding of an artist's process and sometimes lack of agenda. Jeff Rosen is a friend of mine. He manages Bob Dylan. And he said, sometimes you have to let an artist make a really bad decision or just go in the wrong direction so that they can get to the really good decision, so they can get to the other thing that they're trying to get to, but it's a very convoluted path. And I thought that was really smart. Not saying Bob Dylan made any wrong decisions. That's not the takeaway from that quote. I was talking to him about myself. And maybe that's something that a lawyer, maybe some people see progress as a single line, but that's not like that. There's failure involved, and failure is critical.
That's a good place, I think, to end. But before we end the session as a whole, I want to thank you, of course, for the time that you spent with us today. And for me, our discussion overall has reinforced the importance of community, whether it's in times like these where we're battling a pandemic, or whether it's the importance of artists supporting artists and creativity in turn supporting a community in which the artist lives. All of that, I think, reinforces the theme of the conference, the importance of creative ecosystems, and how they, reinforce and support the communities in which they operate. And so in that vein, I'd be grateful if you took a moment and introduced and told us a bit of the backstory about the video that we're going to close with.
Oh, yeah.
Then we'll go out on that.
First, let me say thank you to you, Sandra, and to all of the attendees, because, being asked these questions and getting to talk about it, it clarifies my own thoughts as well. And also, I so appreciate all you people who support artists and have our backs. I can't tell you how meaningful that is, so thank you. This video, I actually wrote the song before the pandemic. It was one of those things that I didn't know where it was coming from. So I wrote the lyrics and I sent it to John Paul White, a friend of mine, and I said, do you want to collaborate on this? You want to write the music? And he said, sure. So we had the song, it was sitting there. It didn't belong on my last record, didn't belong on his last record. And then the pandemic started. We said, this seems really appropriate. And like I said, we're not interested in being divisive. We're interested in being together. So we made a video, and all of this went to charity. And it's called We're All in This Together Now.
Thank you, Rosanne.
Thank you.
We're going to play the video for everybody on the live stream and on the Zoom stream. And Rosanne, you and I need to mute and end our video stream so that we don't interfere with it.
All right, thank you, Sandra.
Thank you.
Of course, not everybody can stay home during these times. Health and emergency workers, people manning grocery stores, gas stations, and so many more.
Essential workers on the front lines of this pandemic, the everyday heroes. Let's take a look at a few.
Daddy was a Baptist, and your mama loved to dance. You were born in Memphis, but you live in Paris, France. You may lose your faith in everything, or you may take a solemn vow. But from this day on, my friends and foes, we're all in this together now. You may love the carousel, or the silence of the trees. You may be the last one standing, or the queen of all you see. And some rest easy on the mountain, and some sweat behind the plow. But make no mistake, for heaven's sake, we're all in this together now. Night will fall, the wind will howl, all those things we love so well. Empires crumble while we sleep. Oh, but you must have a story to tell. Wake up now, I wanna hear it. Wake up now. I love you like a brother,
and I don't know you at all.
Heard your voice across the wire, and I never thought you'd call. So hold tight the sword, hold fast the sail, 'cause we might be taken down. It's a lonely world,
But it's our own